She had always been taller than the other girls in her dusty frontier town, tall enough that even the ranch hands paused to glance when she walked past, though their eyes quickly turned away with the same look that said not for me. In a place where women were expected to be petite, soft-spoken, and easy to fold into the crook of a man's arm, her height was a silent sentence, a judgment she never asked for, but felt every time a dance partner refused his hand, every time her mother adjusted her posture as if to make her shrink. Her name was Clara Hart, and she was the daughter of a blacksmith whose forge kept the family alive through hot summers and bitter winters. But even her father, kind as he was, had a habit of speaking to her in the same resigned tone as a man speaking about a horse too tall for the stable door. She was 17 when the last of her so-called suitors turned away, a merchant's son who had smiled at her in church and then whispered to a friend that she'd make a fine lookout in a storm, and that was the day Clara stopped wearing ribbons in her hair. The gossip in town was cruel in the way only small towns can be: quiet, constant, and carried like smoke on the wine. Poor girl, she'll end up alone, they said. Unless some outlaw wants her to scare off coyotes, she took to the open spaces, where the sky felt big enough to match her frame. Walking along the barbed wire fences at the edge of town, boots kicking at dusk, her heart a mix of hurt and restless energy she couldn't name. And it was there on one of those aimless walks that she first heard the hoof beats, a slow, deliberate rhythm like the heartbeat of the land itself. And when she turned, she saw him, a lone cowboy on a black horse, riding without hurry as if time itself bowed to his pace. His hat shaded his eyes, but she could feel his gaze on her, steady, measuring, not with the mockery of town boys, but with the curiosity of someone used to seeing things others overlooked. He reined in the horse a few yards away, the smell of leather and dust hanging between them, and said in a voice like dry whiskey, "You look like you don't belong to this place." And she laughed, a short bitter sound, replying, "Neither do you, stranger." He introduced himself as Eli Cade, a drifter who'd seen more of the West than most men had maps for. And though his face was lined from sun and wind, there was a glint in his eyes, like he carried stories worth trading gold for. He asked if she'd walk with him, just a piece down the fence line, and she surprised herself by agreeing, matching his long strides without effort. The two of them talking about nothing and everything: how the desert changes color at dawn, how a coyote's cry can sound like a woman weeping, how sometimes the loneliest people are the ones who seem the strongest. When they reached a bend in the trail, he told her about the places he'd been: Deadwood, Dodge City, a mining camp in Nevada where men vanished in the night. And as he spoke, she realized her heart was pounding, not from the stories, but from the way he was looking at her. Not like she was too tall, not like she was less of a woman, but like she was exactly the size the world had made her to be. Still, she didn't know yet that this meeting would change her life, that before the year was out she'd stand in the center of a gunfight, that her name would be whispered in towns she'd never seen. For now she only knew that Eli Cade was dangerous in the way rivers are dangerous, quiet until they flood. When they reached the edge of an old corral, he stopped and dismounted, pulling from his saddlebag a small brown leather chest, worn with age and dust, holding it in his left hand while extending his right toward her, and said, "This is yours if you've got the courage to take it." She blinked, confused, asked what was inside, but he only smiled and said, "Not what's inside matters, it's what it means." Something in his tone told her this was no game, and though her better judgment warned her to turn away, she found herself stepping forward, her shadow touching his, the heat of the setting sun wrapping them in gold. When her fingers brushed his, the air seemed to still, the sound of the wind dropping away as if the land itself was holding its breath. "You've been walking fences your whole life," he murmured. "Time to cross one." She took the chest, feeling its surprising weight, and he nodded once before stepping back, mounting his horse with the grace of a man who'd been born in the saddle. "When you're ready, open it," he said, and without another word, rode away toward the dying sun. Clara stood there for a long time after he vanished, the leather chest heavy in her hands, a knot of questions in her mind, and an unfamiliar spark in her heart, something between hope and fear. That night, she set the chest on the table in her small room, the lamplight making the brass latch glimmer, but she didn't open it. Instead, she sat by the window, staring at the moonlit fields, wondering if the world was bigger than the people who had tried to define her, wondering if somewhere out there she was more than just the tall girl. In the days that followed, she found herself returning to the fence line, half expecting Eli Cade to appear again. But he didn't. Instead, whispers began to spread in town, rumors of a gang moving through the territory, of a bounty so high men were killing each other for a chance at it, of a black horse seen near the edge of town. The blacksmith's forge grew hotter with work as men came in to repair rifles, sharpen knives, and hammer out iron stirrups. Clara listened, but kept her own secret close, the leather chest now hidden under her bed. One evening, while she was sweeping the forge, a stranger burst in, hat in hand, dust covering his coat, and asked her father if he knew a man named Eli Cade. Her father froze for a moment, then said he didn't, but the stranger's eyes shifted to Clara with a knowing look before he tipped his hat and left. That night, unable to bear the weight of her questions any longer, she pulled the chest from under the bed, sat on the floor, and opened it. Inside was not gold, nor jewels, but a folded map and a single silver coin engraved with a crownless queen's head. The map was marked with a red X in a canyon she'd never heard of, and scrawled beneath it in bold handwriting were the words, for the one they called Detal, "Your height is the measure of the horizon." Clara didn't sleep that night. By dawn she'd made her decision. Whatever lay at that canyon, she was going to find it, and in that choice, though she didn't know it yet, the girl the town had discarded began the journey to becoming the queen without a crown. And for those listening to this story right now, remember, sometimes the very thing the world sees as your weakness is the thing that will carry you further than you ever dreamed. If you want to hear the rest of how Clara Hart rose from outcast to legend, riding the wild west winds with nothing but courage and a mysterious map, make sure you subscribe right now, because Chapter 2 will take you deeper into the dust, the danger, and the destiny that made her a queen no man could dethrone. Asterisk. Clara left at dawn without a word to anyone, the map tucked deep inside her satchel, the silver coin cool against her palm whenever doubt crept in. She carried only what she could manage: a canteen, some jerky, a small revolver her father had taught her to use but never expected her to need, and the memory of Eli Cade's steady gaze. The prairie stretched before her like a test of endurance, the sun slow to rise but quick to scorch, each mile humming with the songs of hidden creatures. She walked when the land was too rocky to ride, and hitched lifts on wagon trails when she could, but most of the journey she made alone, her tall frame casting a long shadow that seemed to lead the way. She followed the map's twisting lines through gullies and dry creek beds, until the land began to change, cliffs rising like giant sentinels, the wind turning sharper, the earth shifting from gold to a deep rust red. On the third evening she reached the mouth of the canyon, a jagged wound in the land that seemed to swallow the light. She could feel it before she entered, a weight in the air, as if the place itself remembered things it wasn't sure she was ready to know. Stepping inside, she found the walls painted with strange symbols, some carved deep into the stone, others faded as if a century's worth of dust had tried to erase them. Her boots echoed on the canyon floor, each step stirring loose pebbles that rattled like whispers in the dark. She had gone no more than a mile in when she heard it, the faint jingle of spurs and the low creak of leather. Someone else was there. Her hand went to her revolver, but she didn't draw, instead pressing her back against the wall and waiting. A shadow elongated across the ground before she saw him, a man in a tattered duster coat, eyes like shards of flint, his hand resting easy on the grip of his gun. "You must be Clara Hart," he said, his voice carrying in the canyon like a stone skipping water. "I've been expecting you." She asked who he was, but he only smiled without warmth, tipping his hat just enough to show a scar running from his temple to his jaw. "Name's Rafe Dorian, and that map you've got, it's worth more trouble than you can handle." She kept her voice steady, asking how he knew about it, and he said, "Because I've been chasing Eli Cade for 3 years, and he don't hand things to folks unless they're part of his game." Before she could answer, the echo of hoof beats joined them, this time from deeper in the canyon, and out rode Eli himself, the black horse's coat gleaming even in the dim light. "Rafe," he said coolly, I see you found my friend." Clara's pulse kicked up as the two men sized each other like predators circling. Eli dismounted, his boots crunching in the grit, and without looking at her said, "That map leads to something buried long before either of us was born. But not for gold, it's for a choice." Clara didn't understand, but there was no time for explanation. Rafe's hand moved and Ellie's followed, both drawing in a blur, the gunshots cracking like thunder in the enclosed space. Dust and echoes swallowed everything for a moment, and when it cleared, Rafe was gone. Only the mark of his boots leading deeper into the canyon. Eli turned to her, his jaw tight, and said, "If you want to turn back, now's the time." She shook her head, saying only, "I came this far." They followed the trail until the canyon opened into a hidden basin, where a dry riverbed coiled like a sleeping snake. In the center stood a weathered stone altar, and on it, half buried in sand, a second coin identical to hers. Eli told her the legend that a band of crownless queens had once ruled not with crowns, but with decisions that shaped the fate of tribes, towns, and territories, and that each coin was given to a woman deemed unbreakable, a woman who could see beyond the reach of her own shadow. Clara listened, her mind turning over the insults she'd heard her whole life to Tall, and wondering if it had been nothing more than a warning she'd outgrow the place she was given. Before she could speak, the crack of a rifle split the air, the shot striking the altar inches from her hand. Rafe was back, perched high on the canyon wall with the long barrel steady. Eli shouted for her to run, but she didn't. She picked up the second coin, the metal hot from the sun, and in that moment something inside her decided she'd stop being the hunted. She dove behind the altar, drew her revolver, and waited for the next shot to tell her where he was. When it came, she fired back, the sound rolling through the canyon like the roar of 100 storms. Rafe's hat flew off, his head snapping back, and though he didn't fall, he retreated into the stone shadows. Eli joined her at the altar, breathing hard but grinning in a way that said he'd expected this. "Guess you're ready," he said, and handed her the map again. Only now it was marked with more than one X. "The West is bigger than one canyon," he told her, "and there are more coins, more stories, more choices to be made if you're willing to ride." Clara looked at the horizon framed by the canyon walls, the same horizon people had once told her she was too tall to see over, and realized she'd never been meant to fit into the small frame they built for her. She pocketed both coins, holstered her gun, and said, "Let's ride," as they left the canyon. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint clang of iron and the whisper of women's voices, as if those crownless queens were still watching, still weighing, still waiting for the next choice, and for you listening now. Remember this: the things that make you stand out are the very things that will make you stand above, but only if you choose to use them. If you want to know where Clara Hart rides next, the towns she'll save, the enemies she'll face, and how the legend of the queen without a crown will echo across the Wild West, make sure you subscribe right now, because the next chapter will take you beyond the horizon she was told she'd never reach, into the heart of a destiny written under the open sky.